Hello you beautiful misfits, Matt here with the fourth of my E3 2017 videos, this one covering the UbiSoft conference, because I promised I'd do them all, and by fuck I will. Which was kicked off by Yves Guillemot himself at the end of the pre-show segment that I rarely, if ever, bother to even mention in these things. Although rather than beginning with a montage of games, as is de rigueur with these things, it began instead with a montage of game locations like outer space and discos, all plastered with Ubisoft's new logo that a lot of people have compared to an aerial view of a dog turd, although I personally think it looks more like albeit drawn by someone in MS Paint, using their feet, from which we plunge straight into this brief animated confirmation of Mario and Rabbids Kingdom battles, without so much as a welcome or good afternoon. No fuss, no muss, just straight in there. Alright, so it didn't last too long, and Yves Guillemot himself did come out to talk some more about it. I'm still no less surprised that there wasn't a literal half-hour fucking dance parade beforehand with confetti and people in animal costumes. Anyhow, after confessing that Ubisoft have spent long, lonely nights dreaming of Mario doing things with rabbits, Yves then introduced none other than old Shigeru Miyamoto himself, sporting a big plastic hand cannon and accompanied by Bill Trinan to provide translation services and additional firepower. Shigeru and Yves here then annihilated the cheering audience in a hailstorm of boiling hot plasma and screams that will haunt my sleep until I finally pass from this mortal coil. And so, with that remarkably brief conference over and done with, it's time to give my verdict. No, of course they didn't murder the audience with insanely high-tech weapons. It certainly would have been a memorable conference if they had though, right? Instead, they just did a bit of mutual backslapping before showing us all what the actual game was about, which according to Shigeru here, had to be something that wasn't a traditional Mario platformer. Indeed, one of his express conditions for this collaboration was that it be like no Mario game that's ever come before. That being no mean feat when you remember Mario's been in racing games, RPGs, puzzle and sports games, amongst numerous other genres. And yet, Ubisoft actually pulled it off, showing us a Mario game like no other Mario game before it. Although it may look just a bit familiar to some of the more strategy-minded among you.
XCOM give it to you. Fuck, wait for you to get it on your own. XCOM deliver to you.
Yep, I certainly didn't see that coming. I mean, I knew there was a Mario Rabbids crossover game in the works. That info got leaked yonks ago. But XCOM Mario Unknown? That's quite some way down there on a list of things I'd ever expect from the Mario franchise. And speaking as a fan of XCOM, most of that series' turn-based strategy goodness is clearly evident here. You've got your squad, albeit Mario and costumed Rabbids instead of your personal friends and loved ones, moving from cover to cover, flanking enemies and using special attacks to expose them or get the drop on them. There are even weapon loadouts and an Overwatch system, where your squad can fire on the enemy during their movement phase. So of course I absolutely love this idea. I know that seems a bit out of character for me, but I've never been shy to give praise where it's genuinely due, and anything that gets kids into turn-based strategy games is great. You could maybe criticise it for being a touch too close to the XCOM formula, but we're not exactly drowning in turn-based tactical games, are we? Plus, if it does well enough, we could see more collaborations between Nintendo and other Western developers, in genres you might not otherwise expect. Imagine for example a version of Civilization with a heavier Mario flavour, although I'd play as Bowser if the option were available, purely so I could stick it to the hoity-toity Mushroom Kingdom elite. Anyhow, a genuine congrats to Ubisoft for somehow managing to pleasantly surprise me. Kudos also to Kingdom Battles creative director Davide Solan, seen here getting understandably emotional after an onstage shout out from Shigeru himself, for giving us the most interesting Franco-Japanese collaboration I've seen since
The Mysterious Cities of Gold.
After that, it was time for some more Assassin's Creed Origins, which according to Ashraf Ismail here, has been 3.5 years in the making. So here's hoping it's not as buggy as Assassin's Creed Unity was, eh?
For the 10-year anniversary of Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, thanks Ashraf. I make one little joke about bugs in Assassin's Creed games and you hit me with a cold hard reminder of my own mortality. I bought a knife, you bought a gun. Fair play. All Ubisoft really had to show in this segment was a new cinematic trailer featuring statues, jackal-headed priests burning ships, a hippo squaring off against a Nile crocodile, and other scenes that would have been really handy when I was making my Microsoft video. Speaking of which, I don't really have much more to say about this than I did during that video, which you can also watch here on this channel, hashtag shameless self-promotion. So all I'll say here is, oh yeah, motherfucking ancient Egypt. If you want ninjas, you can fucking whistle for them. As for gameplay footage, Ubisoft charitably gave us a brief snippet of 3 Ubisoft people sitting on a couch, elsewhere, playing a bit of the game for us. Except it was presented in Darkside Phil style camera on monitor vision, albeit from an over the shoulder angle that ensured everything in game looked swaddled in perpetual gloom. There was a promise of 30 minutes of raw gameplay footage after the conference was over, and I can confirm they at least got a direct video feed sorted for that, but I make it a rule to only cover stuff in the conference presentations themselves. So there you go. Next was The Crew 2, with cars, some bikes, more cars, a couple of boats, cars, planes, cars, horses maybe, cars, and blimey, it's gone all Inception all of a sudden. Now there's an intriguing concept for a racing game, eh? Driving around a world gone completely topsy-turvy and oh nuts, it's just a fancy visual conceit used in the trailer to jazz up the transitions to different vehicles and locations. Boo! Anyway, the chap presenting this segment was the game's creative director Stefan Belay, wielding a really soothing voice. Not as soothing as that of Mark Cerny from Sony of course, because Mark Cerny's voice could probably quell the fury of a supernova.
But you don't need a 4K TV or an HDR TV to experience the benefits of PS4 Pro.
Yet still pleasant to listen to nonetheless.
Drivers and fans meet across the country and celebrate a common passion for all things motorized.
Such was the tranquility of his voice that somehow, through a kind of vocal alchemy, he made all this subsequent gameplay footage of high-octane street, off-road, boat and plane racing into something almost meditative in a way. It helped that many of the camera views were far enough from the vehicles that all the horrid engine noises were subdued, submerged even into the general background noise of The Crew 2's sadly not topsy-turvy world. Apart from that though, it's just cars and cars with boats, planes and bikes tossed into the mix. Either way, most of you know my feelings on cars and racing games, so let's just move on, shall we? In a calm, orderly fashion. To a trailer for South Park, The Fractured Butthole, which was as amusing and entertaining as we've come to expect from a game we've already seen 2 years in a row. It's the sequel to Stick of Truth, with all the kids playing as superheroes instead of fantasy archetypes. It's an RPG just like Stick of Truth and will apparently be available October 17th. A date I'm taking with a boulder of salt and no restrictions on my own breathing. Although they did have a playable demo at the Ubisoft booth, so maybe it won't be delayed again. After that interlude, things got a bit strange, even by Ubisoft standards.
Whilst working with Ubisoft, we stumbled across some fascinating research that had begun in the late 90s. Essentially, neuroscientists had figured out a way to upload brain data, trauma, emotions, memories, to the digital space.
This was to introduce Elijah Wood and his film production company Spectrevision dipping their collective feet into VR in a collaboration with Ubisoft called Transference. At least he's not murdering prostitutes at a remote farmhouse anymore. Because why do the obvious, oh Mr. Frodo, Lord of the Rings reference, when you can do the slightly less obvious Sin City one instead. Anyhow, this was one of those proof of concept trailers where you don't see any gameplay and you're given the barest bones of what it's about, consciousness transference in this case, and yet it manages to stay with you for quite a while after you've watched it. The finished article could just wind up being a glorified FMV game, remember those, wedded to VR tech, and yet who knows? Maybe a group of filmmakers tinkering with the tech from a different perspective can pull off something new and interesting. Perhaps they can achieve, as Lisa Whalen of Spectrevision puts it here, their ambition of,
we want you to take off the gear and still feel unsettled.
Well, I don't know about the game itself, but that trailer left me a wee bit unsettled, and as you can clearly see, I ain't wearing any VR gear. I think. Frankly, I don't think I'm sure of anything anymore after watching that. I mean, how can I be sure any of you watching this are even real? What if I'm simply a prisoner in Elijah Wood's digital farmhouse and you're all just the electronic ghosts haunting it? Maybe Spectrevision's not even a real company and just something invented whole cloth for this weird VR experience that... oh, well, yes. There is their Wikipedia page, I suppose. Sorry, I got a bit irrational there for a second. After that shake-up of my perception of reality, we return to more familiar waters with "Sure, it be another pirate game this year. This here one be called Skull and Bones, a nautical combat game from UbiSoft Singapore, set in a golden age of piracy. Finally, Ubisoft have listened to our pleas for scurvy action on the seven seas. Yar, that rhymes! Perhaps I be having the soul of a poet after all, as me mam used to say. Tragically, the game got leaked literally 2 minutes before this nice cinematic trailer here. More's a pity. Still, it'd be having lovely things like sea battles, lady pirates, and wicked-looking galleons sporting fancy-looking prow ornamentation that'd cost you a weighty some of doubloons back in the day. All of this was presented by the game's creative director and sea dog, Justin Farron, dropping sage-like pirate wisdom such as
120 days. That's how long the average pirate survived a lawless life on the seas during the golden age of piracy.
Aye, that be true. So many mateys dead and gone. Justin also showed us some of that there gameplay you young rapscallions be hungering for, and which will be mighty familiar to any of you that's played Assassin's Creed 3 or Black Flag. It'll all be about sailing solo or with fellow like-minded captains in their own ships in a semi-persistent online open world, engaging in 5 versus 5 of that PvP stuff all the cabin boys be raving about in Letters Home to Their Mams. You get different game modes like this loot hunt one, and you also be getting different ships with different abilities and roles. Some being better at long-range shooting, for example, while others are more built for ramming and boarding. There is some of that too, by the way, although it seems a wee bit too automated here for my tastes. If I'd be going toe-to-toe with the crew of another vessel, I'd be wanting to have some control over which scoundrels I'd be shanking in the gut. There also be krakens, yarr! Although all you sees of it is some tentacles under the surface, like in this cinematic cutscene. You know, I'd not be feeling quite so excited about this one. It seems fine and all that, with plenty of cannon fire and other things to stir your blood, yet I be thinking the gameplay of Sea of Thieves might end up having some more legs to it if you catch me drift. Sea legs, of course, here! Because you see, a pirate's life isn't all naval battles, no. It's also carousing, caressing, finding buried treasure, burying your own treasure, of course, and establishing rudimentary democracies with their own systems of checks and balances as a variable and unique counterculture to the prevailing social order. Teleportalia! And with that nautical number over, the show moved on to Just Dance 2018, introduced by some funky members of the Lin Kuei from Mortal Kombat, strutting their stuff to Jamiroquai. I suppose they have to earn a living somehow between Mortal Kombat tournaments. I think this one on the left might be Scorpion, although I could be wrong. They are all wearing the same outfits after all. After a while of Jamiroquai, the Lin Kuei assassins are joined by— oh Christ, what fresh hell is this?
Fatality.
Please make this stop, please make this stop, please make this stop, please make—
We're leaving.
Just Dance 2018 is released on all consoles this October. Moving the fuck on to another South Park game. You haven't even got Fractured but Whole out yet and you're already announcing another one? Well, it's a mobile game called South Park Phone Destroyer that seems to be a standalone version of the turn-based combat from Stick of Truth, possibly married to a collectible card system. On your phone, obviously. Fortunately, that segment was brief and we could move on to the next segment for StarLink, Battle for Atlas by Ubisoft Toronto, which might be familiar to those of you who played that mission in Watch Dogs 2 where you hack into Ubisoft and liberate some E3 presentations. As you can see from the footage here, it's another game with the same artistic inspirations as No Man's Sky, and indeed looks uncannily similar to it in general with its alien vistas of weird flora and fauna, except with some sort of story, if these cutscenes are anything to go by. Okay, I'll bite. I got some enjoyment out of No Man's Sky, and I'm not completely burned out on the idea of exploring a vast, colourful Oh, Ubisoft, that really hurt to watch. Truly. Not because the game itself looked awful either, far from it. Asking me if I'd like to play a game where you can fly around in space is like asking a crack addict if they'd like a cheeky bit of crack. The story cutscenes meanwhile reminded me somewhat of STARCOM, the US Space Force, another show I loved watching as a kid.
There's air down here.
Maybe so, but let's keep our helmets on just to be safe.
Although everyone I've ever mentioned it to just stared at me like I was speaking Martian, Anyway, Ubisoft, dangling all that delicious looking space and planetary atmosphere combat in front of me, only to tie it to a system of plastic fucking toys? That's beyond cruelty, it really is. And the presentation from producer Matt Rose here was the proverbial salt in the searing plasma wound.
Like many of you, I grew up in the 80s, obsessed with sci-fi, animation, comics, and of course, all the really cool toys.
Also, isn't it a bit late to try and muscle in on the toys to life genre? What makes you think you can succeed where Disney Infinity failed? Although in fairness, Disney Infinity's demise came from a combination of licensing arguments, oversupply, and internal political squabbles at Disney, to name but a few factors. I just don't see a new IP cracking Skylanders' stranglehold on a toys to life genre so easily. Perhaps I'm wrong though, and misunderstanding what the tykes and kiddywinks are into these days. Maybe they are all crying out for a new toys to life game, harkening back to the same 80s cartoons their mums and dads watched and introduced them to. Whatever the end result, Ubisoft, I'm clearly not your target market for this one. When I buy a game, I don't want to have to also buy a bunch of toys on top of it, costing me more money and cluttering up what little space I have.
Collect your way, with both physical Starship collectibles and digital versions.
Fine, so I can buy digital versions instead. That's still extra money I have to fork out on top of the base game. Oh, and it's consoles only anyway? That makes my decision even easier. So if you'll excuse me for a moment, I'm just going to go take my initial interest in StarLink here down to the harbour. Right, where were we? Oh, it's steep. Another thing I'm absolutely in no way the target audience for. Still, it must have performed within Ubisoft's expectations because this little segment was for some DLC, presented by Rebecca Kotaz of Ubisoft Aniseed, Annika Rice. Cheers, Rebecca. As I was saying, this bit was for Steep Road to the Olympics, which, it won't at all surprise you to learn, is an officially licensed tie-in with the Pyeongchang 2018 Winter Olympics. So if you're a fan of Steep, you got that to look forward to. However, since I've not played it, and probably never will, I'll just say I really like the nice little smiley face patch on Rebecca's jacket here. Before moving on to the big presentation of Far Cry 5, which got a whole bunch of mewling nitwits' panties in a knot when it was first unveiled back at the end of May. Whereas recent Far Cry installments have dumped you on an island, into a fictionalised Himalayan setting, and back in time to the dawn of man, Far Cry 5 pitches you in the middle of rural Montana, specifically the fictional area of Hope County, where you're up against a fundamentalist militia cult with their own unique take on the Bible. The kind of balmy, rural crazies that would likely be handling snakes if they didn't already need both hands to hold their massive guns. According to executive producer Dan Hay here, said collective of quasi-religious nutters have managed to take over the entire area, and escaping Hope County alive is easier said than done.
You find yourself trapped deep in cult territory, cut off from the rest of the world. They've closed the roads. There's no cell phone signal, no 911.
As narrative concedes to confine you to a single geographic area of the United States go, it's all well and good, except one tiny little detail that somewhat undermines it. Small thing, really. Tiny speck in the grand scheme. That's right, one of your possible NPC allies has a plane. A fucking plane. Oh no, the crazy cults have closed off all the roads. However shall we escape this one small county in an otherwise vast state? Here's a guide for you. Step 1. Get on the cocking plane. Alright, so I'm sure there are other narrative reasons to keep your balls deep in lunatic country. Probably a kidnapped friend, family member or loved one that ends up drinking their red, white and blue flavour aid, or turns out to have been a member of the cult all along. Whatever the eventual story, as with every Far Cry before it, you're up against an army of disposable psychopaths with just your wits, a shitload of guns and knowledge of turning colour-coded flowers into magic healing juice. You'll probably also have a bow. Oh, and NPC allies too. Aside from Planey McPlaneface here, you've also got a sniper pal who can climb water towers, and presumably churchy ones as well, to cover you with her rifle. I wonder if she can also climb all those obligatory towers that uncover bits of the map for you. Nah, she'll probably tell you to eat shit and do it yourself. As well as Escapee McGet on the cocking plane and Sniper McHeadshot here, you also have a dog! A special dog who can not only maul your enemies but also bring their guns to you, which is more than what D-Dog in Metal Gear Solid 5 could do, although it remains to be seen if Boomer here, or indeed any of the other dogs you're able to hire, can be trained to carry a knife in his mouth and cut people's throats. And if none of those float your seaplane, you can also call in a friend to play through the entire game with in co-op. All that aside, it's more Far Cry, innit? Albeit somewhat close to home for the folks across the pond. Which is what makes it all the more appealing to me. As someone who has visited America on 3 occasions, West Coast, East Coast and Midwest respectively, many years ago, I fully understand the version of America depicted in Far Cry 5 is a cartoon one on steroids and growth hormones. I understand it's also, paradoxically, an accurate one, because to quite a few of us outside the land of the free, home of the brave, America is simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. A country that preserves huge areas of amazing natural beauty as national parks, open for all to visit and enjoy, while simultaneously allowing dangerous levels of lead in town water supplies. A country that puts "warning may contain nuts" on packets of peanuts, for sale in supermarkets that also have dedicated gun aisles. A country that is both American gods and preacher at the same time. Look America, you're mental, but I love you. I love you, but you're mental. Bah, that's enough wanky pseudo-academic pontificating on the duality of the American psyche. Another little detail that has me interested in Far Cry 5 and not mentioned in this presentation is it has a character creator that'll let you customise your in-game appearance. We're not exactly talking City of Heroes here, it's basic stuff like physical appearance and gender. Given previous instalments had pretty solidly defined protagonists like Jason Brody and RJ Garley, however, I'm intrigued to see what effect this might have on the story, if any. The final presentation of the conference was Beyond Good and Evil 2, the follow-up to Beyond Good and Evil, a game I have never played. This reveal prompted much joy from the first game's very dedicated fans, who've been waiting a Last Guardian-esque aeon for a sequel to escape development hell. Said reveal, which Ubisoft's Michel Ancel here had outright denied was going to happen, consisted entirely of a quite pretty cinematic, in which this lady's British ape accomplice robs a pigman hybrid. Both then make their escape across an insane mishmash sci-fi cityscape in a Fifth Element style chase sequence. As gorgeous to look at, brimming with details and packed full of character as it was, however, it told us very little about what the game itself might be like. I had to scrape that info from elsewhere, after the fact. Firstly, it's not a sequel but a prequel, set a few generations before the first game, so fans won't be playing as Jade again. Oh dear. It will take place in an open world, oh dear, with procedurally generated elements. Oh dear. You can sign up for early access. Oh dear, oh dear. And is currently, according to Michel Ancel himself, only at day 0 of development. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. There is a tech demo of it, however, and it looks pretty swish for something that supposedly didn't have any graphic assets 2 weeks prior. According to Michel here, the goal is to let you do side quests like delivering pizzas, discover other spontaneously generated events like human trafficking while delivering said pizzas, photograph the aforementioned human trafficking for a reward, and so on and so forth, until you've earned enough money to own your very own ship, like this one, with which to travel the stars. So it'd be kind of offline, online, single player, co-op MMO with tailored and procedurally generated content. You know what, chalk me up as tentatively interested. Looking forward to seeing more, but not rushing to slap down the cash for a pre-order. And with that final reveal, Yves Guillemot, along with half of Ubisoft, crept out onto the stage to gather in bidding us farewell. Is that it? Fucking hell. That didn't feel like an hour and 10 minutes. This conference positively zipped by, moving through game after game at a fair old pace. Stuff we'd already seen before was touched on briefly without being drawn out, while new games were allowed to speak for themselves, for want of a better description, presented alongside just enough information to elaborate on what we were seeing without drowning the audience in boring minutiae. The sometimes mind-boggling cringe factor of previous Ubisoft conferences, meanwhile, had been greatly toned down, which is appreciated. Although, a part of me rather misses it in a way. The masochistic part of me, sure, but a part of me nonetheless. The lack of Aisha Tyler also felt a bit strange, and if I'm honest, I sort of found myself missing her a bit too. I know her presenting could be rather hit or miss at times, and she was responsible for at least one notable cringe moment, but without her presenting it didn't feel like a traditional Ubisoft conference. But then, this wasn't a traditional Ubisoft conference anyway. It was less extravagant, less campy, more subdued, yet also a lot more focused. Though I suppose you have to be when there's an enormous French media conglomerate eyeing you hungrily from the shadows, itching to devour you whole. So, in conclusion, a very good conference with a strong showing of games. Well done Ubisoft, and I sincerely mean that. Credit where it's due, it was the best one I've done in years. Part of me does feel a bit sad, however, that the balmy, extravagant, oft-times cringy Ubisoft of conferences past has fallen to the wayside a bit. It was necessary, I know, Ubisoft have to change with the times and so forth, and yet it kind of feels like the end of an era, you know? Ave at que vale, Mr. Caffeine. We shall not see the likes of thee again.
I've been Ubisoft's very own Mr. Caffeine. Let's go back in time, shall we? Doodle doodle doodle. Hold my joy wand. Doodle doodle doodle. Gaming is life. Doodle 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 doodle.
Yeah, it's probably for the best, innit? So with that surprisingly tolerable conference done and dusted, it's on to the Sony conference next, followed by the Nintendo conference, and then finally the Devolver Digital non-conference, or nonference, as I suppose you could call it. I made a promise to cover all of them and I intend to keep it, so until next time, as always, you can go now.